one more question about getting to that point, and then I know that the chairman would like us to take a little tea break, and after that I'd just like to talk about the Middle East before I hand the baton on. But you, in your memorandum, refer to an unpublicised meeting you had with Colin Powell during your summer holidays in August of 2002 at someone's house on Long Island. And this was at a very critical juncture. Prime Minister was heading for yet another meeting with President Bush. The question of, as you note in your memorandum, whether or not we would go down the UN route was very much in play in this Washington orbit you've just described between different factions. When you saw Colin Powell on Long Island, how worried was he about the likely reactions internationally and particularly in the Middle East if the policy that the hawks were proposing in the administration was the one that went through?
Well, I don't think I'm extremely anxious not to quote Colin Powell, because I think it's only fair to say that he must be allowed to speak for himself. However, I think it's a matter of fair public record that generally he and I were in the same place on this sort of issue, and he had huge experience. After all, including in respect of the first Gulf War. So he was very, very sensitive to what was happening in the Middle East. And it's also the case that he didn't exactly see himself as a fellow thinker with people who were described as neocons. I mean, and all that was that debate, the tension in the Bush administration between the neocons and on the one side, and people I'd describe as rather more sensible people on the other, was very well known. So he had all these anxieties for sure.
And so were you worried after you'd seen Colin Powell?
Well, look, I worried to a degree, but my job was to try and assist in the British government's immediate foreign policy objective, which was getting the United States down the UN route. The fact that George Bush had been declared elected as President of the United States was a reality. The Supreme Court had decided. He was President, he was installed. They were not our natural intellectual political allies, but we had to work with them. You can't pick and choose the administrations that you work with in foreign policy. You accept them as a fact. That was one fact. The second fact, above all, was 9/11 and how that had sort of turned thinking and perceptions upside down, particularly in the United States. So we had to work with that. And I thought it was absolutely key part of our overall approach, which was that we should deflect those in the United States administration who wanted to take impetuous military action against Saddam Hussein for the purpose of regime change, and try and get to a point where the United States' own objective was not, in practice, was not regime change, but the disarmament of Iraq. And that indeed was what we got by the President's statement in the United Nations on the 12th of September. And that, if I may say without much modesty, I mean, that was quite a significant achievement. I mean, above all for Secretary Colin Powell and those who supported him, and it was he, but also for the work of the UK administration.
I think that'd be a good moment to take a pause.
Shall we do that? Break for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.